Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today, we're diving deep into one of the most pivotal moments in modern history, D-Day. We've all seen the epic Hollywood movie soldiers charging across the beach, a hail of machine gun fire, and a few heroic acts turning the tide of battle. But how much of that is actually true? We're going to peel back the layers of myth and look at the brutal, chaotic, and often misunderstood reality of what happened on June 6, 1944. Let's get started. First, let's tackle that iconic image of soldiers sprinting across the sand. Movies like Saving Private Ryan show men running for their lives, dodging bullets as they dash for cover. The reality was far grimmer and much slower. Imagine this: you're a young soldier, barely out of your teens. You're loaded down with about 60 to 90 pounds of gear: your rifle, ammunition, grenades, rations, a gas mask, and a life preserver that often did more harm than good. Your boots are soaked, filled with sand and water, making each step feel like you're dragging concrete blocks. The moment the landing craft ramp dropped, you weren't met with an open field to run across. You were met with a wall of noise, smoke, and sheer terror. The sand was littered with obstacles designed by the Germans, known as Rommel's asparagus, sharp, angled steel beams meant to rip open landing craft and impale soldiers. The beach wasn't a flat runway. It was a killing field. The idea of sprinting was a fantasy. Most soldiers who made it off the ramps were immediately forced to crawl. They crawled on their hands and knees, or flat on their bellies, inch by painful inch, through the blood-soaked surf and over the bodies of their comrades. It wasn't a 100-meter dash. It was an agonizing, hours-long struggle for survival, just to gain a few feet of ground. They moved slowly, deliberately, trying to present the smallest possible target while being weighed down, and exhausted before the first shot was even fired in their direction. The heroism wasn't in the running. It was in the relentless, agonizing crawl forward under unimaginable pressure. Now, let's talk about what was actually causing the most devastation on those beaches. When you think of D-Day casualties, your mind probably jumps straight to the terrifying sound of a German MG-42 machine gun, nicknamed Hitler's buzzsaw for its incredible rate of fire. These weapons were absolutely deadly and pinned down entire companies of men. Hollywood loves to focus on them because they're visually dramatic. You can see the tracer rounds. You can see the soldiers reacting to direct fire. But they weren't the biggest killer on D-Day. Not by a long shot. The most lethal weapon on Omaha Beach, responsible for an estimated 60% of all Allied casualties that day, was something far less cinematic: the German mortar. Unlike machine guns, which fire in a straight line, mortars fire projectiles in a hierarchy. This is called indirect fire, and it's what made them so terrifyingly effective. German mortar teams were positioned in fortified bunkers and trenches, often miles behind the front lines, completely hidden from the view of the landing soldiers. They had spent months, even years, pre-registering their targets. This means they had already calculated the exact coordinates for every square foot of the beach. So, when the Allies landed, the Germans didn't need to see them. They just needed to know which pre-plotted grid square the soldiers were in. They could then drop mortar shells with pinpoint accuracy right on top of them. A soldier could find what he thought was safe cover behind a shingle embankment or a destroyed vehicle, only for a shell to come silently down from the sky and explode. There was no defense, no warning. This rain of high explosives is what turned the beaches into a slaughterhouse, causing widespread chaos and staggering losses that a machine gunner, limited by his line of sight, simply couldn't achieve on his own. This brings us to another huge myth: the idea of a well-oiled military machine executing a flawless plan. Films often portray commanders coolly giving orders and brave soldiers carrying them out. The reality of D-Day, especially at Omaha Beach, was complete and utter chaos. Command and control broke down almost immediately. First, communication. The radios issued to the troops were supposed to be waterproof. They weren't. The moment they were submerged in salt water, they became useless bricks of metal. Officers couldn't talk to their men, They couldn't talk to the ships offshore, and they couldn't coordinate with neighboring units. Units themselves were scattered to the winds. Strong currents and winds pushed landing craft far off their intended targets, sometimes by miles. Companies were broken up, with men landing on beaches where they knew no one and had no idea who was in charge. A sergeant might find himself leading a group of soldiers from 3 or 4 different platoons, with no officer in sight, and even if an officer was there, trying to shout orders over the deafening roar of naval gunfire, crashing waves, and constant explosions was nearly impossible. Add to that the thick, choking smoke from grass fires and explosions, which reduced visibility to just a few yards. For most of the morning, D-Day wasn't a coordinated assault. It was thousands of small, isolated groups of terrified men fighting for their lives with little to no direction. It was survival, not strategy. So, if communications were down and the troops were in disarray, what about the massive naval bombardment that was supposed to soften up the German defenses? Surely that helped, right? This is one of the most sobering truths of D-Day. The pre-invasion bombardment, which was meant to obliterate the German bunkers, was shockingly ineffective, especially at Omaha Beach. The Allied plan called for a massive showing from battleships and cruisers, followed by a wave of bombers dropping thousands of tons of explosives on the coastal defenses. On paper, it was devastating. In practice, it was a near-total failure. At Omaha Beach, the naval shelling was only about 3% effective. Let that sink in. 97% of the shells missed their targets or had no significant impact. The reasons were numerous. The bombers, fearing they would hit their own landing craft approaching the shore, delayed their bomb release by a few seconds. Those few seconds were enough for their entire payload to land miles inland, harmlessly cratering French farm fields. The naval guns had their own problems. Poor visibility due to weather and smoke made it incredibly difficult to aim accurately. Furthermore, the German bunkers were masterpieces of defensive engineering, built with reinforced concrete, often several feet thick and dug into the cliffsides. They were designed to withstand exactly this kind of punishment. Most shells simply bounced off or exploded harmlessly against their thick walls. So, when the first waves of infantry hit the beach, they expected to find dazed defenders in ruined fortifications. Instead, they faced fully alert, fully armed German soldiers in pristine concrete bunkers, ready and waiting for them. So if the plan was chaos, communications failed, and the bombardment didn't work, how on earth did the Allies win? Was it down to a few extraordinary heroes, like the movie suggests? While individual acts of bravery were countless and absolutely essential, the cold, hard strategic reason for the victory at Omaha Beach is less glamorous. It was a victory of mathematics and mass. The Allies won through overwhelming numbers and a grim acceptance of staggering casualty rates. The strategy, stripped down to its core, was one of saturation. The Allied High Command knew the initial waves would suffer horrific losses. They had planned for it. They knew that by sending wave after wave after wave of men onto the beaches, they would eventually overwhelm the German defenders. A single German machine gunner in a bunker can hold off a platoon, maybe even a company, but he couldn't hold off an entire division. Eventually, he would run out of ammunition. Eventually, his machine gun barrel would overheat and warp. Eventually, a few soldiers would slip through the net. This is the brutal arithmetic of D-Day. The Allies had a seemingly endless supply of men and material to throw at the problem. The German defenders did not. As the day wore on, small groups of American soldiers, often led by junior officers or NCOs who took command on the spot, began to find weaknesses. They exploited small gaps between the bunkers, slowly flanked German positions, and began to break through the defenses, one painful yard at a time. It wasn't a single heroic charge that won the day. It was the combined, attritional effort of thousands of men, pushing forward, dying, and being replaced by the next wave, until the German defensive line finally cracked under the sheer, unrelenting pressure. It was a victory bought with blood, courage, and overwhelming force. So, When we remember D-Day, it's important to look beyond the Hollywood gloss. The real story isn't one of clean, heroic charges and perfectly executed plans. It's a story of chaos, of grinding, slow-motion horror, and a victory achieved through sheer numbers and an almost unimaginable human cost. The heroes of D-Day weren't supermen. They were ordinary men who crawled through hell, leaderless and terrified, and somehow found the courage to keep moving forward. That, in my opinion, is a far more powerful and awe-inspiring story than any movie could ever capture. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this look into the realities of D-Day interesting, please hit the like button and subscribe for more deep dives into history. Let me know in the comments what other historical events you'd like me to cover. Until next time, stay curious.